Hi, my name's Cressida, and I was the quiet one in my family, the one they never mentioned, unless it was to laugh at. At my sister's wedding, she called me a legend, but only for filing complaints when she stole my clothes. Her fiancé joked that I probably just sat behind a desk typing paperwork. The entire room laughed. No one corrected them, not even my mother. But I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I said 6 words, and suddenly, no one had anything to say. What happens when the forgotten sister holds more power than anyone in the room, and no one even knew it? The envelope was too white. That kind of white you only see in bridal magazines or on cake boxes. It shimmered faintly under the hallway light when I picked it up from the mail table, its rose gold trim catching just enough light to whisper, "You're lucky to be holding me." But when I turned it over, there was no name. No Cressida Monroe. No and guest. Just elegance and erasure. I slid a finger under the seal, careful not to tear the corner. Inside was a card so thick it probably cost more than my week's groceries. Join us in celebrating the engagement of Camille Monroe and Jonathan Pierce. That was it. Not even a scribbled note. Just a glossy declaration that love was happening, and I was apparently a footnote, if that. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. A text from Camille. "Hey sis, don't feel like you have to come if you're slammed. Also, don't wear anything too serious, okay? Jonathan's family is kinda uptight. Keep it fun." I stared at it, read it twice, then a third time just to make sure the sting was real. Don't wear anything too serious. Like my presence had the power to ruin the aesthetic. Like I was some kind of funeral in heels. I smiled, but it didn't touch anything inside. Camille never did learn how to insult without sounding helpful. She mastered the art of polished cruelty by age 12. I tucked the card back into the envelope and dropped it on my kitchen counter, next to an overdue electricity bill. That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened the folder from my chambers. A sentencing memo, a juvenile case, a mother weeping on the stand. It reminded me that some people didn't get justice unless someone serious showed up. "She has no idea what serious looks like on me," I muttered, sipping. I pulled up the quote that lived on a post-it above my desk. "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Camille never liked that I kept it framed. Said it was too grandmother core for my office. I closed my laptop and walked to my closet. I reached for the black dress. Not because it was slimming, not because it was easy, but because I wore black like armor. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't apologize. "I don't wear black to disappear," I said aloud to the silent room. "I wear it to be unmissable." As I pulled the garment from the hanger, my mind drifted. Quick, sharp images from childhood. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to, despite living in the same house. Camille practicing dance routines in the living room while I watched from the hallway. She'd apologize after, always with a laugh. "You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." My hotel reservation came next. I didn't even look at the one Camille had blocked off. I booked a place closer to downtown, one with a view of the city I'd fought to live in on my own terms. Then I ordered a card. White, understated, hand-lettered. I left it unsigned. "This time, I'm not going for her," I said, staring out the window. "Not for them. I'm going for the silence. I'm going to break it." I packed lightly. Black dress, one pair of heels, a folder with a few choice documents, just in case. My robe, pressed and folded, tucked neatly beside it. The irony wasn't lost on me. A judge's robe, next to a wedding guest's dress. 2 uniforms. 2 roles. Only one with authority. The morning of my flight, the sky in Austin was a flat blue. No clouds, no drama. I boarded early, found my seat by the window, and placed my carry-on beneath the one in front of me. As we taxied toward the runway, I closed my eyes. They don't expect me to come. They don't expect me to speak. They don't even expect me to be seen. But I'll be there, and that's the beginning. The drive from the airport to the villa was quiet. I watched the terrain change, flat highways folding into the curves of hill country. The wedding venue sat like a glass crown on a hill, all angles and ambition. Camille had always aimed for optics. This place practically screamed, "Look what I can make happen!" Except she didn't. Not alone. The valet didn't recognize me, which felt appropriate. Inside, I was greeted by a burst of floral perfume, soft laughter, and the crisp sting of chilled champagne. Blush-toned gowns sparkled under chandeliers. Everyone looked ready for a magazine cover shoot. I looked like I'd come from court. And in a way, I had. As I moved through the crowd, some people nodded. Others simply blinked past me. I wasn't surprised. Familiarity never guaranteed recognition in our family. I passed a table where the name tags were lined up like soldiers. Mine was missing. Of course it was. Before I could find a corner to stand in, the MC's voice rang out. Celine, Camille's friend from college, the one who ran her podcast about conscious luxury, stood near the stage, microphone in hand. "Let's welcome the bride's beautiful sister," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Cressida, right? Who works in administration." The pause wasn't accidental. The guess wasn't innocent. And from across the room, I caught Camille's expression. 1 part delight, 2 parts provocation. She turned to a group of guests and shrugged, palms up like, "What can I say?" I didn't flinch. I'd been mislabeled before, misnamed, misused. No one ever corrects a story that keeps you small, especially if it makes someone else look bigger. A little later, I hovered near the appetizer table, pretending to consider a canapé I didn't want. A man approached, mid-40s, tailored suit, ring so new it still caught too much light. "You're Camille's sister, right?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled, sipped his drink. "She said you work with the city, like records or something?" I tilted my head slightly. "Something like that." "That's cool," he said genuinely. "Stable. Must be nice just typing and filing. No stress, right?" I returned his smile. "Right. No stress." In my head, I was recalling last Tuesday, when I'd signed off on a case that sent a man to prison for corporate fraud. 3 years of investigation, 46 victims. But sure, call me a typist. From the other side of the room, I caught motion. Camille mimicking a typing gesture to one of her bridesmaids. Fingers moving in the air, like she was banging on a keyboard. Her friends giggled. One of them turned to glance at me, then quickly looked away. I didn't respond, didn't react. I took a small sip of champagne, let the bubbles settle on my tongue, and stared straight ahead. Dignity doesn't demand an audience. That's why mockery always needs a crowd. I moved away from the table, circling the perimeter of the room. Every inch of the space had Camille's touch. Rose centerpieces, framed engagement photos, customized cocktail napkins with their initials embossed in gold. Near the far end of the hall, past an oversized flower arrangement, I found a spot partially hidden from view. From there, I could see everyone, but no one looked back. Invisible, but present. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a pen, and made a quiet note on the back of my place card, the one I'd retrieved from a staff member's checklist. They had forgotten me. But I hadn't forgotten a thing. The most dangerous person at any party is the one you forget to watch. It was cooler near the floral wall, away from the heat of too many bodies in tailored suits and sequined dresses. I stood there, back straight, hands resting lightly on the small plate I hadn't touched, watching the celebration swirl like a snow globe I had never been a part of. My champagne glass stayed full. I wasn't here to toast. I leaned against the wall just enough to take the pressure off my heels. From this angle, I could see the whole room, people laughing too loud, servers moving with orchestrated grace, and Vera soaking up the attention like it was sunlight. It reminded me of something else, of being 17, of standing in the hallway of our house, envelope in hand, stomach tight. "Dad?" I had said, voice more excited than I'd let myself feel. I got in, Yale Law. He didn't look up, just kept eating. Mom was silent, eyes on her napkin. I waited, then handed the letter across the table. It sat there unopened for several seconds before he finally unfolded it. "Law?" he said, eyebrows lifting like I'd told him I wanted to become a magician. "That's not for women, Cressida. You know that. You should stay local, help your mother. We can't afford to lose your head to some East Coast fantasy." The paper drooped in his hand, and with it, something inside me. He never said congratulations, just folded it back up and pushed it aside. I blinked, refocusing on the wedding scene in front of me. The music had shifted to a slower jazz tempo. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. I reached into my clutch again, fingers brushing the folded note I'd written on the plane. Just a sentence, really. Something I might leave behind when I walked out. I hadn't decided yet. A voice near the gift table caught my attention. "Did you hear what Camille did back in college? That nonprofit scholarship? So impressive." I turned slightly. The woman speaking wore a soft lavender dress and clutched a designer clutch too tightly. That scholarship had been mine. Or it should have been. Senior year, I had spent 3 months researching the intersection of juvenile sentencing and education access. My advisor had nominated me for a fellowship open to collaborative contributors, projects submitted by siblings, best friends, co-authors. Camille saw my draft on the dining table one night, asked what it was. I explained. She smiled and said, "That's cute." She submitted her own version 2 weeks later. Changed the title, tweaked the structure, sent it in with a recommendation letter from the same advisor, whom she had never met until the day she dropped by my class. I found out when the school newspaper listed her name as the award recipient. Camille Monroe, recognized for her deep commitment to youth justice. I still remember the photo. She wore my blazer. I swallowed the memory like a bitter pill. That kind of theft doesn't leave fingerprints, just echoes. I watched her now, gliding through the room, thanking guests, smiling at compliments that weren't earned. For years, I thought they had forgotten me, misplaced my name, left it off by mistake. But they hadn't forgotten. They remembered everything. I just wasn't included in the retelling. They didn't erase me, they overwrote me. A quiet laugh escaped from behind me. I turned to find a man in a gray jacket holding a glass of red wine. "Didn't you used to be the smart one?" he asked, smiling as if we were catching up at a reunion neither of us wanted to attend. I looked him dead in the eye. "I still am." He blinked, hesitated, then chuckled like he wasn't sure if I was joking. I wasn't. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I stepped back into the shadows, where I belonged, for now. As the man with the red wine disappeared into the blur of conversation and camera flashes, I made my way back to the table. The string quartet shifted into a slower tune, and servers began weaving through the crowd with small trays of chocolate-dusted something. My seat was still unclaimed, half-shadowed by a towering orchid centerpiece. I eased into it, let the glass of untouched champagne catch the light, and watched the stage. The MC tapped her mic with a practiced rhythm. "Now," she beamed, "let's hear from our beautiful bride." Phones came out like reflexes. Guests lifted them, already recording. I took a small sip, letting the chill settle behind my teeth. Vera glided onto the stage like she owned it, which, in many ways, she probably thought she did. Her dress sparkled like a warning flare. She held the mic with the kind of ease that comes from being adored for most of your life. "I just want to say thank you," she began, smile glowing. "Tonight feels like a dream. I mean, who would have thought little Camille would end up here?" "Not me." Laughter, scattered but loyal. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I wasn't always this polished, you know. Growing up, I was a little wild. My sister, Cressida, she was the responsible one, always correcting me, always following rules, filing complaints when I borrowed her sweaters." A ripple of laughter. My fingers stayed still on the stem of the glass. "She's a legend," Vera added, eyes sweeping the crowd with false humility. "Specializes in paperwork and principles." I didn't move, didn't blink. The weight of the room shifted slightly. Some guests glanced in my direction, some kept laughing. Vera didn't flinch. If I bleed, I thought, she'll turn that into a punchline too. She paused, turned toward the table where Jonathan, her fiancé, sat. He chuckled, leaned toward the mic. She probably spends all day typing reports, right? He said, voice smug. Government work? More laughter. A woman near me tapped her glass with her fork, as if to signal this was peak performance. Astria wasn't done. Important stuff like documentation, he added, grinning at the audience. I felt the moment settle like sediment at the bottom of a glass. This wasn't teasing. It was a coordinated display, a show, and I was the prop. Camera flashes captured Vera's smile. Somewhere in the back, someone clapped. I picked up my fork, not to eat, just to keep my hand from tightening too visibly. My entree sat untouched. Duck, maybe. Or chicken. It didn't matter. They want a reaction, I reminded myself. They want fire. Instead, I gave them ice. I kept my face neutral, a slight upward turn at the corner of my lips. I'd practiced this in court, watching opposing counsel try to rattle me with condescension or ignorance. I never let them see where it landed. They're building their scene, I thought, but they forgot I write my own scripts. The string quartet resumed. Vera curtsied like she'd just finished a Broadway monologue and returned to her seat amid applause. Jonathan kissed her cheek. I checked my watch. The time would come. I wasn't in a hurry. Some truths don't interrupt. They wait. Revenge is loud, I thought, watching them bask. Truth is colder. They wanted a story. I'll give them a sentence. The applause was still echoing in the hall when the laughter began. First in polite chuckles, then louder, more open. It rolled through the room like a slow tide. People were leaning back in their chairs, heads tilted, some wiping away tears, not from sentiment, but amusement. I didn't move. My eyes dropped to the plate in front of me. The duck, yes, definitely duck, had grown cold. The skin, once crisp, had gone limp under the steam of a conversation I never asked to be part of. My fork sat precisely parallel to the knife, hands resting calmly on the napkin folded in my lap. But underneath the table, my fingers curled slowly into the linen like they were gripping something firmer than fabric. Across the table, I saw her. Alawan, my mother. Her hand was over her mouth, like she was hiding a cough, or a laugh. I couldn't tell at first, but then she turned to Vera and gave her the smallest, most indulgent nod, like she was proud. There was no shame in her face, just approval. My mother never hit me, I thought, voice quiet inside my own skull. She just laughed when others did. A group of Vera's college friends passed by, one stopping to touch her arm. "You should do stand-up," the woman said, grinning. "You were hilarious." Vera leaned into the attention with all the grace of someone who expected it. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her waist. Astria, cool, unbothered, sipped his drink like nothing had happened. Like nothing needed to be acknowledged. I scanned the room. No one was looking at me now. The ones who had laughed were busy pretending they hadn't. The ones who hadn't laughed were too uncomfortable to meet my eyes. When they cheer your humiliation, the family portrait becomes a crime scene. I lifted the champagne glass and brought it to my lips. Held it there for a second too long. I didn't drink. I just wanted to feel the chill press against my skin. I could hear them talking, Vera's voice, always a notch too loud when she knew she had the room. Guests continued to orbit her like she was the bride, the star, the story. And maybe she was. She'd certainly written this one, directed it, cast me as the stiff, humorless foil to her sparkling charm. She'd rehearsed her lines, coached her fiancé, even had the timing right. It was a perfect scene, except I wasn't reading from her script. I didn't clench, didn't cry, didn't flee. There's an elegance in not reacting. It terrifies people more than anger ever could. Because silence, when it's intentional, doesn't look weak. It looks surgical. I set the glass down with a quiet clink against the table. The sound was barely louder than the hum of conversation, but it was enough. It was a marker. They taught me to be quiet. They forgot to teach me how loud truth can be. Let them laugh. I know what happens next. Not long after the string quartet picked up again, the lights dimmed and a large projection screen came to life behind the dance floor. Guests quieted, shifting in their seats as images flickered on. Soft, focused childhood photos of Vera, her first ballet recital, high school prom, family vacations to Destin. A few people let out sentimental sighs. Others chuckled at the more candid shots. A slideshow curated to perfection. Then came the video segment. Short clips of friends and family congratulating the couple, sharing memories. Her college roommate gave a teary toast from a coffee shop. Jonathan's brother filmed his from what looked like a hotel room. Even their old neighbor from across the street sent something in. Ilawan appeared too, sitting by a window, reciting a half-memorized message with a frozen smile. My name never came up. Not even once. When the video ended, applause broke out. The MC returned with the same plastic smile she'd worn all evening. Let's give a round of applause to everyone who contributed such heartfelt messages to the montage, especially Camille, who organized the whole thing herself. That part didn't surprise me. Vera's always preferred stories she controls. What did surprise me was how fast it happened. The cut. So clean. I had submitted my segment weeks ago, a minute-long clip I recorded after hours in my chambers. Just a simple message about love, integrity, and the weight of marriage. I'd worn a navy blouse, minimal makeup, sincere, professional, civil. I approached the event planner at the bar under the pretense of asking about the restroom. She smiled, overly sweet. I kept my tone flat. I noticed my video wasn't included, I said, tilting my head. Was there a tech issue? Her eyes flicked. Oh, she said too quickly. No. Camille made a few edits to match the tone she wanted. Yours was more formal, I think? Of course, I said. They didn't delete me. They curated me out. I thanked her and stepped away. Half an hour later, while I was standing near a pair of tall floral columns, I heard a guest complimenting Ilawan's necklace, a delicate string of emeralds I'd spent weeks selecting last December. It's beautiful, the woman said. Camille has such taste. She said she found it on a trip to Santa Fe? Ilawan laughed softly. She did. She knows me well. I didn't correct her. I had chosen that necklace myself, ordered it from a designer in Asheville, had it wrapped with a handwritten note. For the version of you who still remembers? She never acknowledged it. No call, no text. I only knew it arrived because the tracking number said so. Now, hearing her give the credit to Vera so casually, so proudly, I felt the same familiar fracture deepen. 2 erasures in one evening, one on video, the other around her neck. When your own blood edits you out, you stop wondering if it's accidental. You just stop. I slipped away, unnoticed, weaving through the side hallway toward the powder room. The mirror above the sink was framed in brass, too ornate, too gold. I stared at it anyway. I looked tired, but composed. You can't fight shadows, I whispered. You have to step into the light. And just like that, something inside me locked into place. The next scene. I write. I rinsed my hands slowly, let the water run longer than necessary, then dried them with deliberate care. When I stepped out of the powder room and back into the main hall, the string lights outside had begun to glow. The sky through the floor-to-ceiling windows was softening into that pre-dusk gold Texas does so well. Vera's laughter echoed faintly through the courtyard. I walked toward the bar to retrieve another glass, not because I wanted to drink, but because it gave me somewhere to go that didn't involve pretending to belong. That's when I heard him, mid-50s, red-cheeked, too loud for his own good. Can you believe Jonathan's family gifted this whole estate? He said to no one in particular, sloshing his bourbon as he gestured around. They must really love Camille. My fingers gripped the rim of the glass tighter than I meant to. I hadn't realized I'd stopped breathing until I heard the soft exhale escape my chest. This estate, this glass-encased monument to curated happiness. It wasn't a gift from Jonathan's family. It wasn't even new. I knew because I'd bought it. 3 years ago, when our mother had her second health scare, Camille suggested we invest in peace, said Elowen deserved a retirement home that didn't look like grief. She found the property. I paid for it. The title, the maintenance, the renovations. My name signed every dotted line. And now it was the backdrop to a lie wrapped in vows. I set the glass down untouched and moved across the room. The event planner stood near the gift table, checking something on her clipboard. I approached her calmly. I overheard someone mention the estate was a wedding gift, I said, not raising my voice. Just wanted to clarify. She blinked, then smiled in that overly rehearsed way people do when they realize they've stepped into something bigger than the dress code. Oh, yes. Camille told us it was gifted from her fiancé's family, she said quickly. She called it their inheritance launch party. It's beautiful, isn't it? Lovely, I said. Thank you. I walked away, not because I was finished, but because I wasn't about to unravel in front of staff. She used what I bought to celebrate herself and buried me under it. Back at my table, I stared down at the linen napkin folded into a rose. My fingers ached, not from rage, but from restraint. My mind slid backward. 2 years ago, reading over the estate documents after our father's passing. The language was clear. Both daughters, equal share. Our father's final nod to balance. Camille and I co-owners of the family trust. But a year later, I got a call from his former attorney. Quiet. Hesitant. Your sister and your mother revised the deed, he said. I was obligated to file it. You're no longer on it. I remember sitting at my desk in chambers, robe still on, staring at the blinking cursor in a sentencing document. The lines blurred. I didn't contest it. I told myself I had my own life, my own salary, my own home. I didn't need to fight over legacy with a woman who rewrote it in her sleep. But tonight, they were throwing a party on bones they pulled from me and called it a gift. Inheritance isn't about money, it's about belonging. And they didn't just leave me out of the will, they left me out of the story. I stood, walked past the gift table, past the laughing guests, and out the double doors toward the valet lot. My car was parked farther down, under the oaks. I opened the back seat, reached under the passenger chair, and pulled out a leather folder. Inside, the original deed, notarized, copies of title records, a printout of the revised version, every dotted line Camille had tried to hide under rose petals and champagne. This house may echo her laughter today, but tomorrow it will remember who paid for its silence. I returned to the hall with the folder tucked back under my coat, my heels clicking softer now, as if even the floor understood something had shifted. The air inside was warmer, heavier. Laughter floated in waves, another toast in progress. I moved toward the dessert table, hoping for a second of neutral ground. That's when I felt a tug at my sleeve. A girl, maybe 7, dressed in pink tulle and plastic pearls, looked up at me with eyes wide and honest. Are you one of the people working here? Her mother, just a few feet away, hadn't noticed. The girl's question wasn't cruel. It was curious, innocent. I bent down, met her gaze without a smile. No, sweetheart, I said gently. But that's a fair question today. She blinked, nodded like I'd confirmed her hypothesis, and skipped back to her plate of melting ice cream. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked back toward my table. But I didn't sit. I stood behind the chair, fingers brushing the rim of the wineglass, watching the room like it was a chessboard I'd already memorized. Silence is not diplomacy. It's self-erasure when repeated too long. They wanted me small. They wanted me unseen. They dressed it up as elegance and called it grace. Vera clinked her glass again. The room quieted, obedient. She stood, poised for another round of carefully curated memories and sugary self-praise. Her voice rang with false modesty, hands gesturing as if she were holding court. That's when I stepped forward. One step, then another. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clear my throat. I simply spoke. I'm a judge. That was all. A stillness fell that no music could cut through. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died mid-word. The ripple was immediate. Not dramatic, but surgical. Vera froze mid-sentence, her mouth parted slightly. Her laugh didn't arrive. Jonathan turned, brow furrowed. "Wait! What?" From the left, a voice whispered too loudly to be subtle. "Judge Monroe? The Eastman trial?" Another guest gasped. Someone fumbled their phone onto the tablecloth. I could feel eyes pressing against my skin like a sudden spotlight. Vera blinked fast, tried to recover. "You never mentioned. You were still doing that." I tilted my head slightly. "No one asked." Astria, usually so smooth, suddenly looked like a man who'd underestimated the weather and left his umbrella behind. The guest 2 tables down leaned toward her husband. She handled that sentencing. You remember? The financial case. Made the news for how sharp she was. And then came the clicks. Phones pulled up under napkins, names entered into search bars. The buzz of quiet recognition replacing the hum of party chatter. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I simply turned and walked toward the floral arch, past people who suddenly saw me in high definition. At the edge of the hall, the string quartet stopped playing mid-passage. They didn't know why. Maybe no one told them. Or maybe they, too, felt the shift. I picked up my clutch from the chair I'd never fully occupied, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and made for the door. The trial just began. And for once, I get to judge. There was a pause in the air, so dense you could feel it sitting on your chest. Not a gasp, not even a breath. Just the weight of stunned recognition settling over the room like a slow fog. A waiter near the cake table dropped a spoon. It clattered against the floor, too loud, too sharp. Still, no one laughed. No one moved. A woman near the back whispered just loud enough for those around her to hear. "Judge Monroe? From the news?" I stood still. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't soften the blow. I let the words hang there, untouched and undeniable. From across the room, I watched Jonathan. He looked from Vera to me and back again. His hand, which had been resting gently on Vera's lower back, dropped like dead weight. He stepped slightly away from her, not consciously, but enough. The man who laughed when I was a punchline had just lost the setup. Vera was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out a pitch too high, brittle at the edges. "Well," she said, blinking quickly. She never liked to talk about her job, so I didn't even know she was still doing that. It was weak. Everyone could hear it. Even she knew. From the table closest to the bar, another voice chimed in, this time steadier, firmer. "She sentenced my cousin in 2019. Eastman family. It was all over the papers." Vera's face shifted. Just a flicker. A crack in the perfect shell. That was all it took. Conversations restarted, but not in the same tone. Whispers replaced jokes. People who had laughed now looked down at their plates. The ones who hadn't spoken at all now glanced at me with a new kind of consideration. Not awe, not admiration, respect, guilt. A man who'd barely acknowledged me earlier offered a polite nod. A woman near the champagne bar leaned into her friend and whispered, "She doesn't just show up. She walks in like the room was waiting." I reached for my coat, which was folded neatly over the back of the chair I never sat in. The weight of it grounded me. My glass, still nearly full, sat undisturbed on the table. I left it there. It wasn't a toast I'd ever needed. As I walked past Vera, I didn't break stride, but I leaned in, just enough for only her to hear. "You wrote your version," I said softly. "I just spoke mine." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Outside, the garden was quiet. The path was lined with tea lights, flickering gently in the evening breeze. I walked slowly, heels clicking against stone, the rhythm steady, deliberate. Halfway to the car, my phone buzzed in my clutch. I kept walking until I reached the driver's side, slid in, closed the door. Then I looked at the screen. 2 texts, one from Elowen, another from Vera. Elowen's read, "Call me." Vera's, "You could have warned me." I stared at them for a long moment. Funny how truth only feels like betrayal when it's inconvenient. Inside, the silence hadn't really lifted. Not entirely. There were voices, yes, but they were subdued now, softer, careful. Like everyone was suddenly aware they might be overheard, or worse, misunderstood. The seating chart Vera had designed down to napkin colors was unraveling. Guests weren't returning to their assigned spots. They were lingering in corners, exchanging theories like it was a courtroom sidebar. But they weren't talking about the cake or the playlist anymore. They were talking about me. Jonathan had quietly stepped away. I saw him from the window as I crossed the garden, standing under one of the string lights, hands shoved into his pockets. The groom, absent from his own reception. Vera stood frozen at her table, eyes fixed on the untouched tower of macarons, one of many things tonight that now felt too sweet, too staged. Back inside, someone noticed the folder I'd left. Dark leather, simple clasp. It had rested on the white chair I never sat in, left like an afterthought or a warning. One of Jonathan's aunts picked it up, hesitated, then opened it with slow fingers. Inside was the Eastman decision. My signature on the bottom of the verdict. Behind it, a clipped page from the Tribune. Judge Monroe, justice without spotlight. The photo showed me in profile, outside the courthouse, mid-step. Serious, focused, no filters, no smile. The folder made its way from hand to hand, each person more hushed than the last. No one commented. They didn't need to. It was Seraphine, sitting alone near the back, who finally broke the silence. "She changed my niece's life," she said aloud, not loudly, but with certainty. "That courtroom, she didn't just rule, she listened. She gave her a way forward." No one interrupted. One man near the fireplace bowed his head slightly. Someone else murmured, "That's who she is." And Vera sat in the middle of it all, scrolling on her phone like she was trying to find a version of the internet that didn't already know. I saw her lips move, a whisper to no one. How did I not know? But she did know. She just never asked. Across the room, Elowen sat stiffly, her wineglass untouched. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers wrapped tightly around the emerald necklace, the one she told everyone Vera had gifted her. Her gaze didn't meet anyone's, but she wasn't looking at me either. Just the floor. Finally, her voice came out, soft, brittle. "That was from her." She didn't finish the sentence. Back outside, the night had cooled slightly. I walked into the lobby of the hotel I'd booked on my own terms. No group rate, no shared suite. I checked in, thanked the clerk, and took the elevator to the top floor. The hallway was quiet. My heels barely made a sound on the carpet as I reached my room, card key blinking green. Inside, everything was still, controlled. I slipped off my coat, set my clutch down, and sat on the edge of the bed. No anger, no victory, just space. They didn't need to apologize. I didn't leave for sorry, I left for space. The next morning, I returned briefly. The wedding cleanup had begun, florists repacking centerpieces, catering staff breaking down the buffet. It wasn't about sentiment. I'd left something, my folder, my name. A soft breeze moved through the courtyard, carrying the scent of wilting roses and yesterday's champagne. They were setting up for the family portraits, a staged conclusion, more performance than memory. I stood near the edge of the lawn, watching. Elowen caught sight of me and gave a small wave. She said something to the photographer, then looked away. No one called me forward. They lined up. Vera in the center, Jonathan beside her, their hands linked like a logo. My father stood proudly near them, his shoulders square, his suit impeccable. No one turned to check if I was coming, so I didn't. I stayed behind the arbor, hands clasped, letting the scene play out like a movie I'd once auditioned for and been recast from. Someone took a step toward me. A cousin, maybe, I couldn't place her name. But she hesitated, saw that I wasn't moving, and stopped herself. I heard the photographer say, "Big smiles, let's do one just with parents and the bride." The shutter clicked. It was not forgetfulness. It was choreography. Later, as guests gathered for final toasts, Callistus tapped the microphone. The crowd quieted, though this time it felt less like attention and more like politeness. "I just want to say," he began, "how proud I am of Camille, and how grateful I am to Jonathan's family for welcoming her with such open arms. She's always been a light in this family, a source of joy, and—" I stopped listening. He never stumbled, never looked for me in the crowd. My name wasn't missed. It was excised with care. They didn't forget me. They curated around me. A few minutes later, as people clinked glasses and began drifting toward their cars, a woman I vaguely recognized leaned in and whispered, "It must be hard, being the quiet one." I turned my head slowly, met her eyes. "It's easier than being the blind one." She blinked, unsure if she should laugh or apologize. I saved her the trouble and walked away. Inside, the hall was half empty. I walked past the empty chairs, past the polished silver and the half-eaten cake, until I reached the reception table where my folder still lay. No one had touched it. I picked it up, tucked it under my arm, and turned back. As I passed Vera, she looked up. Her eyes met mine, but there was nothing behind them. Not anger, not guilt. Just a quiet, desperate need for this to be over. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I used to think closure came from apologies. Turns out, it comes from walking away without needing one. The coffee at the hotel was terrible, but I drank it anyway. I sat in the corner of the lobby with my coat draped over my arm, watching the quiet shuffle of guests checking out, staff clearing breakfast trays, and one man asking the concierge about lost sunglasses. Normalcy. It felt strangely luxurious. I scrolled through my phone. Messages from Elowen sat unread, still marked with a blue dot. Another from Vera arrived just minutes earlier. "You could have warned me." And the one before that. "Do you feel good about embarrassing us like that?" I deleted them both. The elevator chimed behind me, and I looked up instinctively. Seraphine stepped out, the same older woman from the reception, elegant in a navy coat, silver hair swept into a clip. She carried herself with intention, not urgency. She saw me and changed direction without pause. "I didn't want to interrupt yesterday," she said softly, resting one hand gently on my shoulder. "But I remember you." Her voice had the weight of someone who knew how to use silence as punctuation. "I'm not one to keep up with the courts, but I was there for the Eastman case. My niece, she was on the victim list. Small business owner, wiped out. You gave her back more than restitution. You gave her dignity." I felt something loosen in my chest. "She said you listened. Even when the lawyers postured and the cameras circled, you never flinched." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you." There was nothing rehearsed in her face. No polite flattery. Just the kind of acknowledgement that doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. Sometimes you don't need the whole room to see you. Just the one who mattered. We parted without ceremony. She didn't ask for a photo. I didn't ask her name again. Later that morning, I loaded my bag into the trunk of the rental, GPS already set for Austin. The drive was long, but it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like direction. A return to something that hadn't needed anyone else's permission. As I crossed the county line, the familiar outline of the courthouse came into view. Its brick facade slightly weathered, the flag outside catching the breeze just enough to ripple. I slowed as I passed, glancing at the steps where I'd stood dozens of times. Never for attention, only for duty. They erased me from family photos, but they'll never remove me from the bench. Back at Chambers, the office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. I set my bag down, shrugged off my coat, and sat at my desk. There, on top of a neat stack of files, was a plain white envelope. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside, a handwritten card on simple linen paper. Thank you for being a judge who listens. I didn't recognize the handwriting. There was no signature, just that one sentence. I held it for a moment longer than necessary, then placed it into the top right drawer, the one labeled Keep. They never asked who I was, but now they'll never forget. Hello, I'm Vanessa. Sorry, Thanksgiving's just for family, my sister said, right to my face. I stood there, pie in hand, heart in my throat, realizing I wasn't family enough to be included. But that wasn't the worst part. They didn't just forget me, they planned around me, left my name off invitations, used my money for a dinner I wasn't welcome to, told people I didn't like family events. That night, I walked out, quiet, pie untouched. But what came next? They never saw coming. How did it get this bad? Was it always this way and I just didn't see it? And when I finally said enough, why did they act like I was the problem? I pulled up to the driveway just after 4. The sky had already started to dim, streaks of orange dragging across the November clouds like smeared makeup. Oregon always knew how to deliver that kind of cold, the kind that wrapped around your wrists and snuck down your collar, even if your coat was zipped. I sat there for a moment, engine running, staring at the front door of the house I grew up in. The pie sat in the passenger seat, still warm. I'd made it from scratch. Apple, not pumpkin, because I remembered, maybe too vividly, that pumpkin made Dad's throat itch and Delphine claimed it was too pedestrian. I brought a bottle of Merlot too, nothing fancy, just enough to show I didn't come empty-handed. Not that they ever noticed. No one had texted me the address, but they never did. It was always assumed I'd just show up, quiet, useful, present. As I stepped up to the porch, I smoothed my coat and adjusted the pie tin. I had on the navy sweater Mom once said brought out my eyes. I knew better now, but old habits die hard. Maybe, just maybe, this time I'd be let in properly. Not tolerated, welcomed. The door wasn't locked. It never was on holidays. I walked in. Laughter exploded from the dining room. Every seat was filled. White tablecloth, centerpiece of eucalyptus and tiny pumpkins, silverware gleaming like it was set for a photo shoot. Delphine sat at the head of the table, one hand wrapped around a wine glass, the other gesturing mid-story. Dad was leaned back, laughing in that deep, performative way he always used in public. Mom sat on the right, nodding as if she hadn't spent years calling Delphine a handful behind her back. I stepped into the archway. Silence didn't fall, but a ripple of awareness did. Delphine turned, raised her brows like she'd just seen a surprise guest at her wedding, and smirked. Sorry, she said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. Thanksgiving's just for family. A few people chuckled awkwardly. A man I didn't recognize actually winced. My mother reached for her wine glass and stared into it. Dad gave a half laugh and muttered something I didn't catch. I brought pie, I said, holding it up like a peace offering, or maybe like a shield. Delphine nodded to the side of the room. There's a spot for you by the kitchen. It wasn't a seat. It was a folding chair pulled next to the trash can, across from the fridge. A little card table sat there with a paper napkin and one mismatched plate. I froze. No one said anything else. No one offered to make space. No one moved a plate or a chair. I walked over slowly, the tile echoing beneath my boots, and set the pie down on the card table. The plastic chair let out a loud creak as I sat. I didn't take off my coat. From my corner I watched as Delphine lifted her glass. To chosen family, she said, eyes skipping past me like I was a painting no one liked, and to everyone who really shows up. The glasses clinked. My throat tightened. My hands were cold now, even inside my coat. I stared at the pie. No one reached for it. No one reached for me. Then came the final blow. Delphine leaned back and laughed. Oh, and Vanessa, you can take the leftovers home. We figured you might be hungry after working all week. I hadn't mentioned work. I hadn't said a word since walking in. They didn't care. They never had. Mom dabbed at her eye, pretending to laugh like it was all in good fun. Dad raised his glass toward me. Good to see you, kiddo. It wasn't good. None of this was good. I could feel the room tightening around me like a noose made of napkin rings and white lies. I stood up. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. As I passed behind Delphine's chair, she leaned slightly to the side to avoid me, as if I might stain her with proximity. I didn't stop to speak. I didn't throw the pie. I didn't cry. But I did something I'd never done before. I walked out with my head high, still holding the pie, still in my coat, still invisible, but no longer silent. They thought I'd fade like I always had. Not this time. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even shut it hard enough for them to look up from their wine glasses. The cold air hit my face the moment I stepped off the porch. Not the kind that bites, just the kind that makes everything feel a little more hollow. I walked straight to my car, pie still in hand, and set it down on the passenger seat like it was something sacred. Maybe it was. Maybe it was proof I still knew how to care, even when no one cared back. The engine turned over with a low groan. I didn't start driving right away. I just sat there, watching the reflection of the house's warm yellow light in my rearview mirror. They didn't even check if I left. I pulled away slowly, one turn after another down those same streets I'd biked as a kid. But this time, no destination. No timeline, just motion. The pie slid slightly across the seat when I made a right onto Jenkins Road. I reached over and steadied it like it might fall apart, like I might. But I didn't. Not tonight. Somewhere past the third intersection, Delphine's voice looped back in my head. That whisper. The one I wasn't supposed to hear. You're just a walking wallet. It was said with a laugh, not even venom, just dismissal. Like I was an ATM that happened to breathe. It hurt more than the chair near the trash, more than being ignored. It was the acknowledgement that they saw me not as part of them, but as a resource, a bank with a pulse. I didn't cry. That part of me was dry now, overdrawn, like everything else they'd taken. I kept driving. No music, just the hum of tires over wet pavement. It wasn't until I passed the Chevron by 148th that the flashback hit. Clear as day. 2 weeks ago, at work, I was checking emails on my lunch break. Our office manager, Jenna, was organizing Thanksgiving plans. She had this big whiteboard with everyone's out-of-office dates and travel plans. I remembered glancing at it, spotting Delphine's name written under Portland November 23rd to 27. Underneath that, Mom and Dad. Even their +1s were listed. My name wasn't there. At the time, I shrugged it off. Told myself it was probably just a slip. That maybe Jenna didn't ask me. That maybe Mom forgot to mention it. Now I know better. You can forgive being forgotten once, maybe even twice. But when your name keeps disappearing, from emails, group texts, Christmas cards, it stops feeling like an accident. It starts to feel like erasure, like you were never really part of the frame to begin with. I pulled into a vacant lot near an old diner. Parked. Let the silence sit. The kind of silence that wraps around your ribs and squeezes. I opened my phone. No new messages. Not a single, "Are you okay?" Not even a question mark. I opened my banking app. It was second nature at this point. There it was. The charge? Sunset Ridge Catering. Deposit? $742.50. My card? My deposit? My name on the receipt? Just not on the guest list. They'd planned it all on the family thread, the one I was no longer in. They used me to pay for the wine, the table settings, the flowers, even the jazz duo playing in the corner. All of it billed to me. Delphine had sent me a Venmo request last month, joking, "Can you lock in that caterer Mom loves? We'll pay you back." There was no we. There never had been. And the worst part, I did it. I always did. Because I thought if I kept showing up, if I kept helping, they'd remember I was theirs. They didn't. They just remembered my PIN. I took a deep breath and stared through the windshield at the streetlight blinking red. 3 cars passed. None of them noticed me. Just like home. I scrolled through my phone, pulling up my note app. I started typing. Delphine's $500 car down payment, Dad's root canal emergency, Mom's retirement catering trial, Delphine's online course fees, just until her grant came through. The Airbnb reservation I covered when their friend's wedding fell through, no reimbursement. Not even a thank you. Not once. I closed the notes, put the phone down, leaned back and stared at the ceiling of my car. It wasn't about being needed, it was about being used. I reached for the glove compartment, pulled out the catering invoice I'd printed the week before, just in case. I don't know why I'd kept it in there. Maybe some part of me already knew this would happen. I folded it slowly, neatly, like a contract waiting to be voided. They thought I had no power, but I held the wire, and I could cut it. I didn't decide anything right then. I just sat with the knowing that I wasn't helpless, that I was done being their convenience. Eventually, I drove home. The apartment was quiet, no one waiting, no messages. The pie stayed where it was, still uncut, still warm from the car. I sat in the silence, looking at the screen of my phone, watching it remain blank. Then I whispered to the dark, "They'll notice when it's gone." I left the pie on the kitchen counter, still in its foil pan, still covered in foil. The apartment was cold, dark except for the weak glow of a lamp in the corner. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light. I kicked off my boots, unzipped my coat, and dropped it over the back of the nearest chair, like I didn't care if it wrinkled. Because I didn't. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine. I didn't want anything that might soften the sharp edge forming inside me. I wasn't looking to forget tonight. I wanted to remember it, all of it, clearly, like evidence. The silence inside the apartment wasn't comforting. It was too clean, too hollow. The kind of silence that followed you from room to room and echoed everything you'd tried to bury. I sat on the couch, the glass sweating in my hand, and stared at nothing. And then I remembered the call. It had been just over a month ago. I'd been in the middle of a quarterly report for a client when my phone lit up with Mom. I remember hesitating, thinking I'd call back after the meeting, but something in me picked up. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, all syrup and politeness. "I was hoping you could help me out with a small thing." She wanted me to put down the deposit for the dinner venue. "Just to lock it in," she'd said. "You know how quickly the good places go, but don't worry, we'll pay you back right away." Right away never came. I opened my email, dug up the receipt. Not only had I fronted the venue, but I'd also covered the flower arrangements, the seating cards, and even the deposit for the jazz musicians. Little line items, one after another. The kind of things you didn't notice until you totaled them up and realized it was nearly $1,000. I scrolled through our messages. There was no follow-up, no acknowledgement, no thank you. Just silence and assumed compliance. And me? I'd done it. Not because I could afford it, but because I was afraid that saying no would finally sever whatever thread still connected me to them. They didn't need my presence, just my card. I put down the water and stood up, pacing slowly across the room, each step heavier than the last. Then came the memory of the Zoom call. I had asked Mom about it, just offhandedly. "Wasn't there a planning call about Thanksgiving?" She'd laughed. "Oh, just a quick little chat. Nothing serious, mostly Delphine figuring out decorations." But a few days later, I saw it. Aunt Rhonda had posted a screenshot on Facebook. Everyone was there. Mom, Delphine, the cousins, even Grandma on a fuzzy video square. The caption said, "Can't wait to celebrate with this crew." Everyone. Except me. I hadn't missed the call. I'd been left off the invite. Deliberately. I took a breath and sat back down. My hands were trembling, not from sadness, but from the slow boil of something sharper. Clarity. It was like seeing a picture I'd looked at for years suddenly come into focus. They didn't forget me. They erased me. Piece by piece, event by event. Until all that was left of me was a PayPal trail and a name they didn't mention unless it was to explain my absence. And then, just to salt the wound, I remembered something else. 3 weeks ago at a book club, I ran into one of Mom's neighbors, a sweet woman named Teresa who made fantastic lemon bars and always gave me an extra one. She'd smiled and said, "Your mom told us you're not really into big family things." I'd frozen, smiled politely, laughed it off. But I remembered how I'd canceled a weekend in Bend with friends to attend a family brunch that Delphine ended up rescheduling. I remembered skipping a business retreat to fly in for Dad's surprise party. I'd arranged my life around them, moved pieces, juggled calendars, and made room. And the story they told? She doesn't like family stuff. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was obscene. The narrative they painted of me, withdrawn, disinterested, aloof, was just their way of excusing the truth. They didn't want me, but they also didn't want anyone to know they didn't want me. So they rewrote me, and people believed it, because I'd never said otherwise. I opened my laptop and clicked into the receipts folder. I pulled up the venue deposit, forwarded it to my personal account. Subject line, evidence. Then I opened a draft to the catering company. Subject, regarding event balance and billing. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I wrote every word with intention. I didn't care if they thought I was cold. Cold is better than used. Cold is stronger than silent. I saved the draft and sat back. The room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a strategy session. The only thing louder than their silence was my proof, and I was ready to pull the thread. The morning light came in harsh, thin beams through my half-closed blinds. I hadn't planned to wake up early, but I hadn't really slept either. I lay still for a while, watching the dust particles swirl in the sun like ash. It was Black Friday, but I wasn't chasing any deals. I had different things to track. Coffee first. I brewed it strong, no milk, no sugar, and sat at the dining table with my laptop open and my phone beside me. The silence in the room wasn't oppressive today. It was functional, focused, like I'd stepped out of a fog and could finally see the lines I'd let blur for far too long. I opened my bank app again, not because I didn't know what I'd find, but because I needed to see it with new eyes. There it was, the transfer to Delphine. 6 months ago, $2,000. Memo. For dance class startup costs. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered the call. She had cried, said the studio wouldn't give her a slot without an upfront deposit, said it was her dream, said she was trying to finally do something serious. I hadn't even hesitated. I transferred the money the same day. 3 weeks later, she posted a photo on Instagram, new iPhone in hand, posing in the mirror of some trendy cafe in the Pearl District. The caption read, "Invest in yourself." Not a single photo of a studio, not a single mention of a class, just aesthetic nonsense and hashtagged self-love. I never got the money back, never got a text, never even got a thank you. I closed the app. Then, without really thinking, I picked up my phone and texted my dad. "Me, we need to talk." It didn't take long for him to call. My phone buzzed less than a minute later. "Hey, sweetheart," he started, voice syrupy with that careful calm he only used when he sensed I was about to be too much. I didn't waste time. "Did you know Mom never paid me back for the venue deposit?" A pause. "Vanessa," he said slowly, "this is just family tension. Everyone's a little stressed. It's the holidays." "That's not what I asked." He sighed, like I was inconveniencing him. "I really think you're blowing this out of proportion." There it was, the phrase they always used when I refused to play dumb. He went on, trying to shift the conversation to forgiveness, about not holding grudges, about how Delphine means well, she's just got a sharp tongue. I didn't say a word. He kept talking, calmer, more patronizing by the second. I imagined him sitting in his recliner, sipping lukewarm coffee, half watching a football recap while dismissing his oldest daughter like a customer complaint he was handling out of obligation. I hung up, mid-sentence. He didn't call back. I tossed the phone onto the couch and went to refill my coffee. The kitchen window let in more sun now, but it only highlighted the ache building in my chest. The kind of ache that comes not from being forgotten, but from being remembered only when it's convenient. A buzz pulled my attention back to my phone. It was from my cousin Alexis, but not a direct message. She'd accidentally forwarded a screenshot from the family group chat. I froze. It showed a thread of messages I wasn't supposed to see. Uncle Jay. She always does this, acts like the victim. Aunt Laura. Vanessa's always been so dramatic. I stared at the screen. Not one message from anyone defending me. No, let's hear her side. No, that doesn't sound like her. Just silence from the people who always ask for my help, but never once asked how I was doing. I didn't cry. I saved the screenshot. Proof. Another piece. As I stood in the kitchen, scrolling back through the thread, my phone rang again, A name I didn't expect. Aunt Karen. Not the warmest woman, not the type to call unless something was falling apart. I answered. Vanessa, she said softly. I heard about Thanksgiving. I didn't respond. She didn't expect me to. I told your mother I wouldn't guilt you into anything, she continued. And I won't. I leaned against the counter, letting her talk. I'm not going to pretend we've always been close, but I see what's happening. And I want you to know, you're not crazy, you're not dramatic. They've leaned on you too hard for too long. I swallowed hard. Delphine? She's been entitled since she was old enough to talk. Your mother? She's always protected that behavior because it's easier than facing the truth. I closed my eyes. Karen's voice dropped lower. Don't go back. Not until they come forward. It wasn't a rescue, but it was something. It was the first time someone in that circle of denial looked at me and didn't flinch. I thanked her. We didn't say goodbye. Just silence. Then the line went dead. I stood still for a while, letting her words settle. Then I walked back to the dining table, opened my journal, and wrote one sentence. They drew the line. I just finally acknowledged it. I picked up my phone and deleted the family thread. Not muted, deleted. Then I opened my email again, pulled up the draft to the catering company. This time I didn't hesitate. I hit send. The email sent with a quiet ping, and I didn't even flinch. I closed the tab and opened the next one, the restaurant invoice, then the florist. I went through each document slowly, carefully, like I was reviewing a contract I never agreed to sign. There it was, line by line, the celebration I funded but wasn't welcome at, centerpieces I never saw, wine I never drank, a cake I never touched. I called the bank next. The voice on the other end was pleasant, professional. I explained I'd like to cancel a pending transaction. She asked if there was an issue with the service. I hesitated a beat before answering. Just misrepresentation, I said calmly. She processed the reversal. Just like that, thousands of dollars were no longer theirs to burn through. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel vengeful either. I felt precise. When I hung up, I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the wind was picking up. A neighbor was putting out Christmas lights already. People moved on so quickly, celebrated so loudly, pretended so easily. But not me, not this time. By 6 p.m., the phone started vibrating nonstop. First my mother, 6 missed calls in a row. Then Delphine. Delphine, what the hell did you just do? Delphine, are you serious? This is your family. Delphine, you always make everything harder. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and blocked her. The family group thread began lighting up too, texts flying in from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months. Cousin Lila, what's going on? Uncle Jay, this is childish. Aunt Laura, you should have handled this privately. Funny how none of them had anything to say last night when I was shoved to the sidelines like unwanted luggage. I muted the thread, then left it. No announcement, no long goodbye, just gone. I don't know what they expected me to do, come crawling back and apologize for not funding my own humiliation. A little after 7, the phone rang again. This time, a name I hadn't seen in a while. Aunt Wendy. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Vanessa, she said, her voice firm but kind. I just want you to know, I see it. I sat on the couch, pulling a throw blanket across my lap. I told your mom this would happen, she continued. They kept pushing you. And I warned them, if you keep treating someone like an ATM, eventually the machine stops working. I let out the first real breath of the day. I'm not here to guilt you, Wendy added. I'm here to say, if you need a place to crash or just someone to listen, I'm here. You're not crazy, you're not cruel, you're just done being used. I didn't cry, but for the first time in days I smiled. Thank you, I whispered. You don't owe them your peace just because they call it family, she said. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. After we hung up, I opened a note on my phone and typed a single message. Then without a second thought, I copied it into the family thread before leaving for good. I will not participate in systems that abuse, dismiss, or manipulate. This is final. The silence afterward was instant and perfect. No rebuttals, no fake apologies, no gaslighting. I grabbed my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and went for a walk. Not to cool off, to take up space again. The streets were quiet, crisp with leftover holiday energy. Couples held hands. Kids giggled over hot cocoa. I kept walking, each step a small reclamation. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox. An actual envelope, handwritten. I knew the handwriting. Dad. I stood in the hallway for a long time, the envelope in one hand, keys in the other. Then I walked inside and sat at the table. I opened it slowly, neatly. The first line read, "Your mother thinks you've embarrassed us." I stopped reading. I folded it shut, placed it on the counter, and left it there. Unopened, unanswered. They didn't see this as justice. They saw it as rebellion. And now, they were preparing to strike back. The envelope still sat on my counter like it might explode if touched. I didn't touch it again. I let it sit there, like evidence in a trial I never agreed to attend. By 10:02 p.m., a new notification popped up. An email with the subject line, "Damages for the dinner incident." I paused mid-sip of wine, thought it was a prank. But no, it was from Evan, my cousin, who barely made it through paralegal school but suddenly fancied himself a legal expert. The email opened with the phrase, "On behalf of the family." That alone told me everything I needed to know. Apparently, they intended to pursue legal recourse for the emotional distress I caused during Thanksgiving and for financial interference. Attached was an itemized list of damages. $350 for a cake no one mentioned to me, $900 for floral arrangements, $1,200 in social disruption, and my personal favorite, $400 for emotional suffering tied to Delphine's social media backlash. It would have been funny if it weren't real, but it was real. They were serious. They were really going to try and sue me for stepping away. I dropped my phone on the couch, stood up, and paced. My living room was dim, quiet, and safe, but my pulse was a wildfire. At 10:17 p.m., a message from Delphine came through. "Delphine, you've always been toxic, now everyone sees it." 10 seconds later, a voicemail. My mother, sobbing. "You ruined your sister's reputation, Vanessa. She was humiliated." Not one word about how I felt. Not one acknowledgement of the humiliation I'd swallowed year after year. They weren't hurt because of injustice. They were enraged because they lost control. They were punishing me for refusing to be used. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel that mix of guilt and rage that used to crash inside me like a tide. What I felt now was clean, like a knife sharpened on truth. At 10:45, I opened the group thread again. It was a war zone. Uncle Jay called me emotionally unstable. Cousin Lila chimed in. She's always been the dramatic one. Screenshots. I saved them all. I didn't bother replying to anyone directly. Instead, I typed a message with no frills, no apology, no drama. You wanted a villain. I just stopped pretending to be the caretaker. Then I left the chat. Not muted, deleted, final. And I blocked them. Every last number, every connection, except Wendy. Because Wendy saw the truth. And because Wendy never tried to break me to feel whole. After that, I opened my banking app. There were still loose strings they could pull on if I didn't act fast. I found the auto payment tab. Dad's old phone plan? Still tied to my credit card. Cancelled. A shared emergency fund I'd set up years ago for Delphine when she was starting over? Still active. Still draining monthly service fees. I closed the account. Transferred the balance, only $128 left, into my own savings. Not because I needed it, but because it was mine. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. They called it family. I called it debt collection. By 11:30, my phone buzzed again. One missed call from a blocked number. Then, an email notification. Delphine again, but this time from her work address. I opened it with the same care I'd give any threat. "You think you're done? You just made it worse. Hope you're ready." My lips twitched into something that resembled a smile. Because if this was war, they'd just started it, and I was already armed. Morning sunlight stretched lazily across the hardwood floor of Aunt Wendy's guest room, the warmth reaching my toes before my thoughts could. I hadn't woken up to screaming, passive-aggressive texts, or demands to explain myself. It was the first morning in I couldn't even remember how long, that I didn't feel the need to brace myself. Wendy had made coffee, strong dark roast, and left it waiting on the kitchen counter with a note. If you're picking up your stuff today, take my car. Yours deserves a break. Her kindness wasn't loud. It didn't come wrapped in guilt or obligation. It just existed, like air. I sipped the coffee in silence, trying to match that energy. By 9:30 a.m., I was back in my own neighborhood, parking down the street from my parents' house. No one greeted me. No one was outside. A cardboard box sat just beyond the front steps with a neon sticky note taped to it. Vanessa's Things. Classy. I approached cautiously, glancing around like I might trigger a tripwire. Inside the box were pieces of a life they'd carefully curated, and now, discarded. The first thing I saw was the scarf I gave my mother last Christmas. Still folded perfectly, the price tag dangling off the end like it had never been touched. I lifted it slowly, checking for any sign of use. Nothing. Beneath that was a photo frame, one we'd taken during a family camping trip years ago. Only the photo inside was torn, right down the center. My half was missing. I wasn't erased, I was redacted. There was also a card I'd handwritten years ago, my words literally scratched out in black pen. I stared at the pile like it might rearrange itself into something kinder. It didn't. I closed the box and walked it back to Wendy's car. Instead of putting it in the trunk, I placed it gently inside the nearest trash bin. Back at Wendy's, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I brewed another cup of coffee. My rage didn't roar anymore, it sharpened. And sometimes, silence is the blade that cuts the deepest. At noon, Wendy tapped on my door, her face drawn but steady. "Thought you might want to see this?" she said, holding her phone toward me. It was a screenshot from the family group chat. Delphine had posted a message. Her leaving made the house lighter. We can finally enjoy real family. No more fake smiles. There were laughing emojis, a few likes. Wendy didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I downloaded the image, printed it from my laptop, and marked it in red Sharpie, noted, archived. I wasn't saving it out of spite. I was saving it so I wouldn't ever lie to myself again about how this family worked. We were never a we. Just a convenient illusion. Later that evening, Wendy and I sat in her sunroom. The sky painted a soft gray that matched the mood, but not the message. "You don't owe them peace," she said, pouring us both glasses of Pinot Noir. "You owe yourself truth." I nodded, unsure of what to do with that kind of support. It was foreign terrain. "Some of your cousins are starting to ask questions," Wendy added. "You've got more eyes on you than you think." "I'm not telling my story for them," I said. "I'm telling it because I need to, on my terms." That night, I opened my laptop and created a private blog. I titled the first post, "Thanksgiving, when family drew blood and I drew boundaries." I didn't promote it, didn't share the link. It wasn't for revenge. It was a burial. I pressed publish and shut the laptop. For the first time in days, I slept deeply. And when I woke up, the first notification wasn't from Delphine. It was from my mother. Subject line, "We need to talk before it's too late." I didn't open the email right away. The subject line alone, "We need to talk before it's too late," was enough to make my stomach tighten. It was vague enough to provoke guilt, but familiar enough to reek of the kind of manipulation I'd been unlearning. My thumb hovered over it for a moment before I let the phone fall back onto the table, like it had shocked me. I stared at the ceiling for a minute, then got up. I took a shower, let the water run hot until the mirror fogged and my fingers wrinkled. I made a cup of chamomile tea, though it cooled untouched. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, legs crossed, gazing blankly out the window at the gray sky. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes, doing nothing, thinking everything. And then the doorbell rang. Wendy, always too quick with kindness, opened the door before I could react. I came to stand behind her, arms crossed tightly over my chest, my hair still damp and clinging to my neck. And there she was, my mother, standing on the porch with a glass casserole dish wrapped in foil, like some kind of culinary olive branch. Her purse hung off one shoulder, and in her free hand she held a plain white envelope, creased at the fold. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, the way someone might declare they're unarmed at a checkpoint. I just thought, maybe we could talk? I didn't answer right away. I nodded once, curtly. Not inside. We walked the 2 blocks to the nearby park in silence. The kind of silence that feels like both people are thinking the same thing, but refusing to say it first. We found a wooden bench near a patch of brittle grass that hadn't survived winter. She sat with the casserole dish on her lap, awkward and out of place, like a third party we didn't invite. She began with the line people always think is a good opening. I know this has been hard on everyone. I said nothing. She pressed on like someone walking deeper into a fog. No one meant for things to get this bad. It's just, family, stress, miscommunication. We were all upset. You were upset. Steam rose from my tea. I focused on the way it disappeared in the air. She didn't say, I was wrong. She didn't say, I hurt you. She didn't say, I'm sorry. What she said was, I miss when we were closer. And what I heard was, I miss when you didn't challenge me. Then she placed the envelope on the bench between us. I wrote everything down. I thought maybe if you could read it, you'd understand where I'm coming from. I didn't reach for it. Just glanced at it once, then back at her. I'll read it later, I said simply. She smiled, a hopeful, premature kind of smile. She thought we were on the brink of mending things. Then I added, but this doesn't reset anything. The smile fell, slow and silent, like a house of cards. I stood, not out of anger, not for drama. I just stood because I was done. I needed to know where you stood, I said quietly. Now I do. She called my name once as I walked away, soft, unsure. But I didn't turn back. Closure, I realized, doesn't always arrive in neat packages with hugs and tearful reconciliation. Sometimes it's a decision, to stop explaining yourself to people who never listened in the first place. 2 weeks later, I was standing barefoot in the kitchen of my new apartment in San Diego. Sunlight poured through the window, warm and sharp. The room smelled like rosemary, lemon, and garlic. The furniture was sparse, a table that only seated 4, a second-hand couch that sagged in the middle, and a bookshelf still half empty, but it felt like mine in a way that nothing had for a long time. Wendy came over with a bottle of Zinfandel. She hugged me at the door without hesitation, the way family should. We cooked together, roasted vegetables, a turkey breast, and 2 slices of pecan pie we picked up from the bakery down the block. Simple. Enough. As we carried our plates to the small balcony, wrapped in light blankets, Wendy asked, "Do you miss it?" She didn't need to clarify. I knew she meant the noise, the chaos, the pretense of togetherness. No, I said honestly. I miss what I thought it was, but that was never real. We toasted as the sky turned orange. Next year, I said, lifting my glass, we invite no one who makes us smaller. She laughed and clinked her glass gently against mine. That's the best tradition I've ever heard. Later, after the dishes were done and Wendy had left, I sat alone on the couch. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference, I've learned. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I hadn't saved but still recognized. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. Can I call you sometime? I think I owe you something. I didn't respond. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel panic. I felt power. I felt choice. It had been 3 weeks since I packed up what little I needed and moved to San Diego. The box of heirlooms, the scratched photo albums, the maybe one-day sweaters, they didn't make the cut. I brought only what was useful, what was comforting, or what reminded me who I really was. That list was shorter than you'd think. This morning, the sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my living room, warming the wood floors and catching the edge of my tiny kitchen table, the one I bought secondhand and refinished myself. I watered the basil plant on the balcony, adjusted the string lights I'd hung last weekend, and made myself coffee. The apartment was still quiet, still mine. I hadn't heard from anyone in the family since the email from Dad's silent signature and Delphine's charming brand of condescension. The message from my cousin, still unread. I wasn't ignoring it. I was choosing not to hurry. I checked the blog once, just once. There were hundreds of views, a few quiet comments. One simply said, "Thank you for putting words to what I couldn't say." That was enough. Wendy had stopped by for tea a few days earlier and shared, with a tinge of hesitation, that Delphine had lost a client, someone who'd seen the blog and quietly stepped away. An old family friend had also unfollowed her on Instagram, apparently after commenting "proud of you" under my post. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, but I did say out loud, "That's what happens when people finally see clearly." There was no celebration, just acknowledgement. The only real moment that felt sharp came when the holiday card arrived. A basic white envelope, no handwriting on the outside, just my address in neat printed font, no return address. Inside, a Christmas card with a snowman, a $50 Visa gift card taped to the inside, and a note in my father's blocky script. "Hope you're well. Dad." No apology, no attempt to discuss, just a gesture without foundation. I didn't tear it up. I didn't frame it. I slipped it into the bottom drawer of my desk, under some old receipts and a broken charger. A drawer I rarely open. That Sunday, I hosted my first holiday meal in the new place, a second Thanksgiving of sorts. Wendy arrived first, arms full of sweet potatoes and a bottle of wine with a post-it that said, "Not for regrets." Two of her friends joined us, kind, grounded women who didn't need small talk to fill a room. We sat outside on the beach grass near La Jolla, picnic style. The table was a fold-out, covered in a mismatched cloth. The food wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional. There were no expected dishes, no rules about who sat where. We passed everything clockwise. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody guilted anyone into going back for seconds. After the plates had been cleared and the sun dipped low, I stood and raised my glass. "To people," I said, "who don't expect us to shrink." No one asked for clarification. They just nodded, because they understood. That night, I took a walk along the shoreline, sandals in hand, toes sinking into the cool sand. The moon was a soft, muted glow above the waves. I could hear children playing somewhere far off. Not screaming, just laughing. Real joy has a different sound. I looked out at the dark horizon and let myself breathe fully for the first time since Thanksgiving. "I didn't leave my family," I whispered into the salt air. "I left the version of me they needed to mistreat." It was never about hate. It was about hunger, for respect, for peace, for space to exist without conditions. And I'd found it. I wasn't healed entirely, but I was mine again. At the edge of the water, I paused, not because I was unsure, but because it felt good to be still. Then I turned and walked back toward the path, away from the tide. I'm not at their table anymore, and for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting to be asked to sit. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't where you find your peace. It's where you learn how to protect it. I spent years believing that if I gave more, forgave more, tolerated more, I'd finally be seen as part of it. But the truth is, some people only love you when you're useful. And once you stop being convenient, they call it betrayal. But choosing yourself, that's not betrayal. That's survival. So here's what I've learned, and maybe it'll land where it needs to. You don't have to keep a seat at someone else's table just because you were raised there. You're allowed to build your own, even if it's smaller, even if it's quieter. And if you're watching this and nodding, maybe you've been that invisible guest too. Maybe you're just now realizing your silence has been mistaken for permission. You're not alone. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own, drop a 1 in the comments. Or let me know what city you're watching from. I want to know who else out there is rewriting their story. And if you didn't connect with this video, that's okay too. Leave a comment and tell me what felt off. Let's make this space real. And hey, if you made it this far and you're still with me, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story that just might sound like yours. Because some stories aren't told to entertain. They're told to remind you, you're not the only one who had to walk away to finally feel whole. Hi, my name's Greta. My water broke in the passenger seat, and my husband looked me in the eye and said, "Get out, you'll dirty the car." He left me there, on the pavement, while his parents watched from the back seat and said nothing. They went on a family vacation. I went into labor, alone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came after, when they tried to take my baby. When they said I was unstable, unfit, when the people who left me bleeding on concrete claimed they were the victims, so I did something they didn't expect. I let the world see what they did. Would you like to know what happened next? I didn't know then that everything I was silent about would one day explode inside a parking lot. It started long before the day Brannon kicked me out of that car. Long before I was gasping for air on that pavement, soaked and shaking. It started with a phone call and a family in panic. Cressida backed out of her engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. "She's overwhelmed," my mother whispered, like it was a sickness we didn't name aloud. The invitations had gone out. The deposit on the reception hall was non-refundable, and Brannon, he wasn't just a fiancé, he was a solution, to my mother at least. "We need to protect the family's name," she told me that evening. "It's a simple ceremony. Everyone knows Brannon. It won't feel that different." I remember the way her hands trembled as she sliced peaches for the cobbler, her voice too calm. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and denial. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying, this could be good for you. You've always been the practical one, Greta. You don't chase after dreams like Cressida. You handle things." That was how I became a bride in someone else's love story. Brannon and I met for coffee the next day. He was polite, still wore the ring Cressida had chosen for him. He didn't apologize, didn't ask if I was okay with any of it. Just said, "Let's not make this worse. It's already embarrassing for your family." I nodded because I was raised to keep the peace, not ask questions, especially when the family name was involved. 3 days later, I was at the tailor with Isolde, my mother, getting Cressida's dress altered. It was a sleeveless satin A-line, more glamorous than anything I'd ever wear, but no one asked me what I liked. They just shortened it, took in the waist, and clipped the veil to my head like I was one of those mannequins at Macy's. My sister never called, not once. At the backyard wedding, the sky was too bright. The folding chairs were uneven on the grass, and the sound system crackled when the officiant began. Brannon stood like a statue, nodding only once as I walked toward him, alone. My father claimed his arthritis was flaring up. "Too painful to stand that long," he said. I knew it was something else. No vows, no kiss, no dancing. Just a rushed exchange of rings, followed by a dinner of cold chicken and 2 warm wine. Isolde pulled me aside before dessert. Her voice was low, but her grip on my arm was strong. "You did the right thing," she said. "You saved us all." No one toasted the bride. That night, in the guest bedroom at Brannon's parents' house, our honeymoon suite, as Vera, his mother, had awkwardly joked, I sat on the edge of the bed in a dress that didn't belong to me and wondered how I became the answer to a problem I never caused. I didn't cry. Crying would have made it feel more real. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, veil off, hair collapsing, and told myself it was a chance, a second-place ribbon in a race I never signed up for. But maybe I could still win something. Maybe Brannon and I could make it work. Maybe, if I was enough of a wife, he'd learn to see me. Maybe my mother was right, that I was the manageable one. Cressida was the sun. I was the shade that made everyone comfortable. The next morning, Brannon made coffee, didn't ask how I slept, and left the house without saying goodbye. His mother offered me leftover cake and asked if I planned on returning to work soon. "No point wasting your degree," she said. That was day 1 of my marriage. I spent it ironing his shirts and calling the electric company to set up our new billing address. I told myself it was normal, that marriages began all sorts of strange ways, that love could follow logic, that affection could grow like ivy on a brick wall if you gave it enough time. But underneath all of that wishful thinking was a silence so loud it filled every corner of that rented duplex we moved into. Every dinner where he stared at his phone, every conversation that ended before it began. Still, I believed I could build something out of nothing, that patience and presence were enough. I gave him everything I had, every dinner, every compromise, every swallowed question. And it never occurred to me, not once in those first few months, that this silence would someday rupture into something violent and public. But it would, and when it did, it would start with a sentence I'll never forget. "Get out. You'll dirty the car." It didn't happen all at once, of course. That kind of fracture takes time to form. Long, stretched out moments where you tell yourself it's not that bad, where you brush off pain as part of the package and silence as sacrifice. The first snow had fallen that morning, thin, barely clinging to the edges of the sidewalks, as if it too wasn't sure it belonged here yet. I stood in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of decaf, watching the sky through the window as I tried to ignore the weight in my lower back. My due date was 2 weeks away, and everything hurt. Brannon came down the stairs with his usual stiffness. He never moved quietly. He stomped, as if the floor owed him something. He didn't glance at me. Just reached for his thermos and muttered, "You forgot to add creamer yesterday." I blinked. "Sorry, I'll make sure it's in today." "You always say that." He walked out the door without so much as a goodbye. I stood there for another few minutes, letting the silence settle, then made his eggs anyway. I knew he'd come back for them. He always did. He liked routines, even if they came with resentment. By the time he returned, scarf half-tied and irritation already simmering in his jawline, I had the plate on the table. He didn't say thank you. He never did. I spent the rest of the morning folding laundry on the couch, resting between loads, feeling my body protest every move. The kicks were stronger now, little jabs that made my breath hitch. I texted my OB and asked if that level of cramping was normal. She told me to come in the next day. That afternoon, I dragged myself to the store to pick up groceries. Vera had invited some church friend over for dinner. She hadn't asked if I was up for hosting. She'd simply called that morning and said, "Don't forget, Donna doesn't eat pork, and please make your spinach dip. She loves it." There was no discussion. No concern about whether I could even stand on my feet that long. Just expectations layered in politeness and veiled commands. I went. I always went. The checkout line was long, and I remember leaning slightly on the cart, shifting my weight to ease the ache in my hips. A young cashier smiled at me as I paid. "Almost there, huh?" she said, nodding at my belly. "Yeah," I said, managing a smile back. "Almost." When I got home, Vera was already in the kitchen, inspecting the dishes I had prepped. "You're using frozen spinach?" she said, lifting the bag with her fingertips like it might stain her. "You know it's just not the same. I always use fresh." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. "I can run back out," I offered, though every part of me screamed no. She sighed like a martyr. "No, it's fine. I just hope Donna doesn't notice." As she left the room, I rested my hands on the edge of the counter, closed my eyes, and let the dizziness wash over me in private. Dinner went how dinners always did. Brannon stayed on his phone. Vera took credit for every bite that Donna enjoyed. I was asked 3 times if I was planning to lose the baby weight quickly. "You're so petite, you won't want to hang on to that." I smiled, nodded, cleared plates, carried hot pans with dish towels instead of oven mitts because the drawer stuck and no one bothered to help me open it. At one point, I burned my palm slightly on the lid of the soup pot. The skin turned red instantly. No one noticed. Later that night, when the guests had gone and Vera was bragging about Donna's compliments on her lovely home cooking, I excused myself and went out onto the porch. The cold bit at my ankles where my pants didn't quite reach. I sat down on the steps slowly, one hand on my belly. The wind stirred the leaves in the gutter, and for the first time in a while, I let my mind wander. Is this what being a mother means? Is this what love looks like? No soft words. No gentle hands. Just expectations and thankless hours. Just pain, masked by the phrase, "It's what women do." I didn't cry. I couldn't have, even if I wanted to. I was too tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the kind that sits in your bones and tells you no one is coming, that the life you're building inside you is the only thing keeping you from disappearing entirely. I heard the door creak behind me. Brannon stepped out, looked at me like I was a lawn ornament left out of place. "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." "I needed air." He sighed, like that was a problem I'd created for him. "You could have at least cleaned the kitchen first." He turned back inside before I could respond. I stayed outside a little longer, watching the frost bloom on the porch railing, hand resting on my belly like it was the only thing still tethering me to this world. And that's when I realized, even when I carry life, they still see me as disposable. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't come with a scream or some grand realization. It came in quiet resignation as I closed the back door behind me and sat down at the kitchen table. My fingers traced circles on the worn wood, the same table where I'd folded Brannon's shirts, signed bills, scribbled grocery lists. That night, I rested my hand on my belly and told myself not to expect anything anymore. The next morning, Vera called before I'd finished brushing my teeth. "Don't forget," she said, "we're doing Brannon's birthday dinner at your place this year. He always feels more at home there." She didn't ask, just stated it like fact, the way people do when they've decided for you. "I haven't had a chance to shop yet," I said, toothbrush still in hand. "Well, you better get to it. He deserves something nice. Make that stew he likes." Click. By the time I hung up, the list in my mind had already formed. Meat, potatoes, broth, rolls, candles for the table, streamers for the wall. I was nearly full term, but no one seemed to think that meant anything should slow down. Maybe I didn't either, not fully. I spent the afternoon at the grocery store, pushing the cart slowly down the aisles. Every step sent a pulse through my lower back, but I kept moving. I bought the things he liked, the snacks his father always reached for, the tea Vera pretended not to drink but always finished. My body ached, but my brain just kept saying, "Make it beautiful. Maybe this time they'll see you tried." Back home, I stood over the stove, stirring, chopping, lifting. I changed out of my sweatshirt into a navy blue dress Vera once said was almost flattering, and I curled my hair the best I could with the mirror fogged over. By the time Brannon walked through the door, my feet were swollen and I was blinking through dizziness, but I managed to smile. "Happy birthday." He nodded, walked past me, and dropped his keys on the entryway table. "Did you remember the garlic rolls?" "I did." "Good." It wasn't long before the doorbell rang. Vera entered first, adjusting her coat with a flourish like she was stepping onto a stage. Walter followed, arms full of wine and conversation about property taxes. Vera immediately walked into the dining room and began moving things around. "Let's not do candles," she said, sliding them aside. "Brannon likes it simpler." I held my breath. I'd picked those candles because they were his favorite color when we were dating, back when he still cared enough to have favorite things. Walter commented on Cressida's newest article, just published in some academic journal. Brannon chimed in with pride. She always had the mind for writing. No one asked how I was feeling. No one mentioned the food. When dinner was finally served, Vera took one bite of the stew and smiled. "I taught her that," she said. "Same recipe I used for Brannon's third-grade bake-off." Brannon raised his glass. "To my mom, for raising me right and teaching me what home should feel like." There it was, a toast, but not for me. I stared down at my hands, fingers trembling slightly. The burn from the pot lid was still pink across my palm. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a sip of water, hoping it would wash down whatever was rising. That's when the door opened again. Cressida walked in, late as always, dressed in one of those flowing coats that made it seem like she'd just come from something important, probably had. "Sorry," she said breezily, kissing the air near Vera's cheek. "Traffic was brutal." She glanced at the table, then at me. "Oh, Greta made dinner. She's always been the artsy one, huh? Not exactly the domestic type." She laughed like it was a compliment. No one corrected her. Vera smiled indulgently. "She means well." Isolda's voice floated in from the speakerphone. Brannon had put her on a call earlier. "She's not like Cressida," she said. "But she does try." That was enough. I stood up, muttered something about needing the restroom, and slipped away. In the hallway, the noise faded behind the closed door. I gripped the sink, leaned forward, and took 3 slow breaths. I didn't want to cry, not because I was strong, but because I was afraid if I started, I wouldn't stop. I looked at myself in the mirror. The curls in my hair had fallen flat. My dress clung too tightly. My eyes were tired, I had cooked the meal. I had set the table. I had burned my hand. And still, I was just a placeholder. Their praise floated past me like I was a piece of furniture. Their words carved out the last bit of space I had left to believe this family might ever see me. I stayed in that bathroom longer than I needed to, listening to the laughter, the clinking glasses, the sound of my own breath. That night, lying on my side in bed while Brannon snored beside me, I rested a hand on my belly and whispered to the baby I hadn't yet met. They don't see me, but I see you, and that's going to have to be enough. 3 days before my due date, Brannon walked into the kitchen without even looking at me and said, "Pack a bag. We're going to my parents' house for the weekend." He said it like I wasn't standing there, like I was a child he was speaking over. I was folding baby onesies on the counter, sorting them by size, by color, by hope. I turned slowly, my lower back screaming after 30 minutes on my feet. "My due date is this week," I reminded him, gently but firmly. He grabbed a banana from the fruit bowl, peeled it with one hand. So it's not a good idea to travel. It's risky. I have a checkup tomorrow." He shook his head, already walking out of the room. "You're not sick, Greta. You're pregnant. You're not made of glass." The conversation ended, like most things with Brannon, without resolution. Just a door shutting, a car starting. By midday, I was in the passenger seat, gripping a thermos of lukewarm peppermint tea, watching the neighborhood roll by. Vera had texted earlier. "Can't wait to see you both." Brannon said, "You're nesting like a pro." The ride was silent except for the rhythmic clicking of his blinker as we approached the main road. I shifted in my seat, trying to get comfortable, but a strange cramping had started in my abdomen. It wasn't the usual tightness. I knew that pattern by now. This was different, sharper, deeper. I pressed a hand to my belly. The baby kicked. Once, then twice, then pressure. I took a breath. "Brannon?" He kept his eyes on the road. "What now?" "I think my water just broke." A beat of silence, then a long, frustrated sigh. "You're kidding." "I'm not." Without another word, he took the next exit, pulling into the parking lot of a strip mall where there was a grocery store, a gas station, and a payday loan place. He parked, left the engine running. I turned toward him, confused. "What are we doing here? We need to go to the hospital." He looked at the passenger seat, then down at my lap. "You're leaking all over the seat." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, he unbuckled his seatbelt and got out. He walked around to my door and yanked it open. "Get out." I blinked, stunned. "What?" "You heard me. Get out. You're going to ruin the interior." I can't walk. I need help." He reached in and nudged my leg with his foot. "Don't make this a scene." My legs gave out as I tried to pivot. The edge of the seat pressed into my lower back. I gripped the doorframe with both hands. Pain was radiating through my abdomen now, and my vision blurred. I felt moisture running down my thighs. Then he kicked my foot, just hard enough to knock it off the mat. I slid out, hitting the pavement knees first. My hands splayed out instinctively, catching some of the fall, but the impact sent shock through my spine. I gasped, my entire body contracting. My knees scraped on the cold, grimy concrete. The smell of car exhaust and asphalt filled my nose. Behind me, Brannon muttered something under his breath, something I was too disoriented to hear. The car door slammed. The engine revved. I watched the taillights disappear as the sedan pulled away. He didn't even look back. Neither did the people in the back seat, his parents who had been silent the entire time. I don't know how long I lay there, shivering on the asphalt. The sun was high, but the wind made everything sharp. I tried to reach for my phone, which had fallen from my coat pocket and landed just inches beyond my reach. My fingers were swollen, stiff. I clawed forward, finally grabbing it and dialing 911 with the last ounce of clarity I had. "My name is Greta," I told the dispatcher. "I'm pregnant. I think I'm in labor. My husband just left me in a parking lot." The dispatcher kept me talking, asked if I could see any signs, any businesses. I read off the name of the grocery store. She said help was on the way. Someone crouched beside me. Someone I didn't know. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She had kind eyes and a warm scarf. She pressed a hand to my shoulder. "I called for help too," she said. "You're not alone." The ambulance arrived a few minutes later. The paramedics asked me questions. How far along, when the contractions started, did I have any known complications? I answered as best I could while they lifted me onto the stretcher. Inside the vehicle, wrapped in a heated blanket, I stared at the ceiling as the sirens wailed overhead. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because the shock had wrapped itself around me like a shell. I was floating above myself, watching this woman, this version of me, being carried away from a man who saw her as furniture, as inconvenience, as excess weight. The paramedic looked down and gave me a soft smile. "You're doing great, ma'am. Just hang in there. You're not alone anymore." I closed my eyes. Let that sentence wash over me. Let it break something open in my chest. Because he was right. I wasn't alone anymore. And I'd never be that woman again. The hospital room was too quiet, not the peaceful kind either. It was the kind of quiet that hums beneath fluorescent lights and settles in your chest like a cold you can't shake. My son lay in a clear bassinet beside me, swaddled tightly, sleeping through the noise of the nurses outside. I hadn't slept much. The adrenaline from the delivery had long faded, replaced by the soreness that lived in every inch of my body. My arms felt heavy. My lower back pulsed with dull pain. But more than that, my mind wouldn't stop running. It kept circling around what had happened, how I got here, not just the parking lot, not just the ambulance, but everything before it, all the small cuts that led to the deep wound. My parents arrived just after sunrise. My mother walked in with a grocery bag of snacks and apples. My dad trailed behind, holding a bouquet from a gas station, the price tag still stuck to the plastic. They looked tired, older than I remembered. Or maybe I just hadn't looked closely in a while. "We came as soon as we could," Isolde said, placing the bag on the windowsill. "Your brother needed the car last night, or we would have been here." I nodded. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I didn't have the energy for anger. My father stood near the door, shifting from one foot to the other. He glanced at the baby, then at me, then at the floor. "Glad you're okay," he murmured. They stayed 15 minutes, maybe 20. Long enough for my mother to comment on the color of the baby's hair, long enough for my father to say we should get the ceiling in the guest room looked at. It's starting to bubble again. Then they were gone. It wasn't until after they left that my phone buzzed. The first message came in at 10:47 a.m. "Brannon, so now I'm the villain. I work non-stop, and you play the martyr." I stared at it, unblinking. I hadn't heard a word from him since he drove off and left me in a parking lot, doubled over and bleeding into my jeans. Another message followed. "Brannon, it's not my fault you couldn't keep it together. You always act like you're some saint." My hand tightened around the phone, not out of shock, because truthfully, I wasn't surprised, but from something older, something deeper, rage. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't even pretending to be sorry. He was blaming me. Again. Like when I forgot to defrost chicken 2 months ago, and he said I was sabotaging his meals. Like when I cried during our first anniversary dinner, and he accused me of ruining the night with drama. Like when I got dizzy walking home from work in the heat, and he asked if I even drank water like an adult. He always needed a target. And I'd always let him use me. I scrolled. Another message came through. "Brannon, I told my mom everything. She agrees you were acting unstable." That did it. I opened the keyboard, my thumbs hovering over the screen. For a second, I hesitated. The old version of me would have deleted the draft, taken a deep breath, and walked away. But that version of me had been left on the asphalt 3 days ago. I typed, "Me. Say one more word like that. I'll reply in court, not text." I hit send. Then I put the phone down. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I looked at my baby, my son, and thought, you will never grow up thinking this is normal. You will never learn love from someone who uses silence as a leash. The door creaked. My mother walked back in, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. She looked at the expression on my face and paused. What happened? I told her. About the messages. About what I sent back. She sat down beside me, slowly. Maybe, she began, choosing her words, maybe you should just let this go. It's a messy situation. Maybe you don't want to make it worse. I turned my head toward her, not with fire, but with calm steel. I'm not starting a war, Mom. I'm ending one. One that's been choking me for years. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she nodded. After she left, I stared at the ceiling for a while. Then I picked up my phone again, not to read his messages, but to open another thread. Me, to Delara. Is the offer still open? I need legal protection. For me and my son. The reply came almost instantly. Delara. Yes, I've already started drafting. Let's talk. And that was the moment it shifted for good. I wasn't asking for fairness anymore. I was preparing for justice. By the time Delara walked into my hospital room, it had been nearly 48 hours since I gave birth. I was exhausted, still swollen, but focused in a way I hadn't been in years. My baby boy slept peacefully in the bassinet beside me, unaware of the world he'd been born into, or the storm building just outside its walls. Delara closed the door behind her, took off her coat, and gave me a long, measured look. In her hand was a tablet. No flowers, no balloons, just evidence. There's more than just your words now, she said, sitting beside my bed. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to brace for. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. There's a residential camera on the building across from that parking lot, she explained. The owner saw what happened, downloaded the footage, and sent it to a friend. That friend sent it to me. I leaned forward slowly, careful not to wake the baby. The video played, and within seconds, I felt the air tighten in my chest. There I was, on screen, visibly in pain, my hands gripping the car door as Brannon circled around, expression cold, lips barely moving. Then came the words. I couldn't hear them, but I remembered them word for word. Get out. You'll dirty the car. And then, the part I hadn't fully processed until now. The kick, not a full-force assault. Just enough to shove, to humiliate, to send a message. I watched myself stumble onto the ground, hands catching pavement, knees hitting hard. The video ended with his car pulling away, no one in the vehicle glancing back. Delara didn't speak for a moment. She didn't need to. The silence in the room now had purpose. Your parents are on their way, she finally said. They should see this too. A few minutes later, the door opened. My mother entered first, followed by my father, who had never been particularly expressive, but now looked like someone who had aged 10 years in 2 days. Delara pressed play again. I didn't watch them while the footage rolled. I kept my eyes on the sleeping infant beside me, one hand resting lightly on his blanket. When it ended, there was a long, awful pause. My mother's voice broke first. I didn't know it was this bad. I turned to her. You didn't want to know. She winced, like the words had more weight than I'd meant them to carry. Maybe they did. Maybe they were overdue. My father stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on the now dark screen. He's not walking away from this, he said, voice low and even. Not a damn chance. Delara nodded. We'll file immediately. Assault. Endangerment. Emotional and physical abuse. And if the company he works for has any values, they'll deal with him separately. My mom looked at Delara, unsure. Will this go public? It might, Delara replied. We won't be the ones to leak it, but it's out there. That camera belonged to someone who already shared it with neighbors. I let that sink in. The humiliation, the betrayal, it wasn't just mine anymore. It had witnesses. It had weight. That night, after my parents left and the baby drifted back to sleep, I received the first voicemail. Brannon's voice, shaky, pretending to be calm. Greta, this is getting blown way out of proportion. You know I didn't mean it like that. You were panicking. I panicked. That video doesn't show everything. I didn't respond. The next morning, another voicemail. You're ruining my life. My job's on the line. You're making me look like a monster. Then a third. We should talk. Just us. No lawyers. Please. We were good once, weren't we? I played them all for Delara that afternoon. She listened without flinching. Should I block him? I asked. No, she said. Let him keep digging. So I saved them all. Every call, every desperate message, every attempt to gaslight me one last time. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't even feel rage anymore. I felt clarity, purpose. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Not just for me, but for the person I used to be. For the person I never got to become. I looked at my son, and something settled in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next, because I was done hiding. The next morning began like most days in the hospital. Routine checks, quiet beeping monitors, the soft hum of nurses' sneakers on the linoleum. My son slept beside me, wrapped in that same pale blue blanket, breathing in that new, uneven rhythm newborns have. It was peaceful on the outside, but inside me, something sharp had started to harden. Delara arrived just after breakfast. She didn't knock, she never did, and I appreciated that more than I could say. She carried her bag over one shoulder and a small envelope in her hand. We've got something, she said, already pulling her phone from her pocket. One of my contacts got a hold of a recorded conversation between Brannon and his parents. They were careless. I sat up slowly, adjusting the pillows behind me. Careless how? She tapped her screen, then handed me the phone. The audio started with Vera's unmistakable tone, tight, controlled, always coated in that fake sweetness. If she files for custody, we'll push for emotional instability, Vera said. No one wants to give a newborn to a woman who has meltdowns in public. Then Brannon. We'll say she abandoned the baby emotionally. The hospital report won't show she was stable. Who's going to prove otherwise? My hands didn't shake. Not this time. They left me in a parking lot, I said. And now they want to take my child. Delara nodded. And this is enough to turn every judge in the county against them. I didn't hesitate. I pulled up Brannon's contact and called. He answered on the second ring. Greta? I heard the recording, I said flatly. You and your mother planning to lie to take our son. There was a pause. Then he said, You don't want to do this. You'll make it ugly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. There's already a video of you kicking your pregnant wife. The world has already picked a side. You wouldn't dare drag this through court. Watch me. Then I hung up. By late afternoon, the video had spread. I wasn't sure how it got out. Maybe through the neighbor, maybe through a leak from the footage we'd submitted. But suddenly, people were messaging me, tagging me in posts, resharing the clip across every platform imaginable. Within 24 hours, hashtags were trending. #Justice for Greta. Stand with her. She deserved better. News segments ran the story with blurred footage and quiet outrage. By the next day, Brannon's company released a statement saying he'd been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation. He called me 4 times that night. I didn't answer. Instead, I met with Delara and her legal team. We gathered everything: voice memos, the security video, medical records, even printed screenshots of every message Brannon had sent me after the hospital. When Walter reached out and asked if we could talk things through like family, I didn't bother replying. Instead, I passed the message to Delara. He was there in the back seat, I told her. He saw me collapse and said nothing. That's the only conversation I need. She nodded and didn't press me further. That evening, I sat alone at the window, my baby sleeping across the room in a crib they'd rolled in earlier that day. I picked up the journal I hadn't touched since before the birth. I stared at the blank page for a long time, then finally began to write. One day, I wrote, you'll ask me where your father went, and I'll tell you gently that he chose not to stay. Not when it mattered, not when it counted, but we stayed. You and me? And we made a new story. I closed the journal and rested my hand on my son's back. He stirred slightly under my palm, then stilled again. Let them come for me, I whispered to myself. This time, I'm ready, with the truth, the proof, and the rage they fed. 2 weeks after giving birth, I walked into the Aurora County Courthouse wearing a blouse that still smelled faintly of baby lotion and coffee. It was early, the air sharp with leftover winter chill, and the sky hung low with clouds, the kind that looked heavy with judgment. I held my head high, but my palms were damp and my heart beat in a quiet, steady thud I could feel in my ears. Delara walked beside me, her steps measured, confident. She wore a navy suit that didn't need introduction, didn't demand respect, it just expected it. I'd seen her in jeans and a cardigan, sipping herbal tea at my kitchen table. But this was not the woman who brought me homemade soup. This was the one who read depositions for breakfast. We stepped past the reporters, their murmurs low at first, then louder when someone whispered my name. There she is. That's her. Greta, from the parking lot video. That video. The one shared over 4 million times now. The one where I'd been kicked out of a car in labor by a man who still claimed to love me. The one the world hadn't stopped watching. Inside, the courtroom was cooler than I expected. Rows of pew-like benches stretched behind us, mostly empty except for a few quiet spectators and media reps. A woman 2 rows back made eye contact with me, then gave the smallest nod. I didn't recognize her, but I recognized her look. She knew this fight. Brannon was already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by a lawyer in an ill-fitting suit and his ever-expressive mother, Vera, perched on the edge of the bench as though her disapproval alone might tilt the scales of justice. Delara leaned toward me before we sat. Let them posture. They can't undo facts. The judge entered. We stood, then sat in unison. The clerk read the case details, her voice crisp and devoid of any emotion. And then it began. First, Delara addressed the court with the same calm cadence she used when ordering tea. Your Honor, my client has endured sustained emotional, physical, and psychological abuse during a high-risk pregnancy. We will present video evidence, authenticated by timestamp and origin. We will present medical records, signed statements, and text communications from the defendant. We will also introduce the presence of coercive behavior that spans over 2 years, culminating in a life-threatening abandonment. Brannon's lawyer objected to her involvement, citing a conflict of interest. Delara didn't blink. I'm not just her legal representative, she said. I'm also executive counsel on the board that recently suspended Mr. Brannon's employment for misconduct pending review. We take abuse allegations seriously. The courtroom gasped. Brannon turned pale, his jaw tightening. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Then came the footage. Delara played the video with no dramatics, just a screen lit up beside the bench, showing me standing by the car, clutching my belly, lips moving, pleading. Then Brannon's face, his hand, his foot, my body hitting the pavement. I didn't look away. Not this time. I watched it all again with the same detachment I had in the ambulance and the same fire I'd carried every day since. Delara didn't stop there. She read his texts aloud. You'll ruin me. You're making me look like a monster. It's your fault for making me angry. Then the medical records, the paramedic statement, and finally, a written testimony from the woman who had knelt beside me that day and held my hand until help arrived. Brannon's lawyer tried to object again, but the judge was already writing notes. Brannon stood, face flushed, and said, It wasn't like that. She's exaggerating. You don't know what she was like behind closed doors. My career. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Brannon, this courtroom is not concerned with your employment. It is concerned with your conduct. Sit down. He did. Then came the ruling. Full legal custody to me. Restraining order granted. Emergency motion to bar unsupervised visitation. Approved. Delara closed her folder with a quiet click. Outside, as we walked down the courthouse steps, the crowd gathered. Reporters asked questions I didn't answer. A woman held out her phone for a selfie. I shook my head, gently. Someone shouted, What would you say to him now? I paused. turned slightly. "He said I'd ruin him," I said, voice steady. "I didn't. He did that to himself." The murmur stopped. Cameras clicked, but I kept walking. I didn't win because I screamed louder. I won because I never let them silence me again. The quiet in my apartment now wasn't the kind that haunted me. It wasn't the echo of being ignored or the dread of a slammed door. This was the kind that whispered comfort, the kind that let me hear my son's soft breaths while I stood at the kitchen counter, slowly stirring oatmeal in a small pot. It had been 3 months since the ruling. I'd moved into this place a week after the court hearing. A modest 2-bedroom with old wood floors and thin windows, but it was mine. Ours. I'd painted the nursery walls pale green during those first evenings, with the baby monitor clipped to my waistband and a step stool I should have thrown away years ago. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Silence used to feel like suffocation. Now it sounded like a pan sizzling on the stove, the washing machine rumbling, the baby's laugh as he tried to reach for the dog-eared plush elephant beside his crib. That morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope with a return address I recognized immediately. Brannon's lawyer. I stood on the doormat, the baby strapped against my chest, and opened it with one hand. Inside was a formal letter, a page of legal updates. Brannon had officially been terminated from his job. The board had completed their internal investigation and found the video to be incompatible with company standards. There was also a paragraph about a pending review from the district attorney's office regarding spousal assault. Attached was a handwritten note. "Greta, I want to talk, not as enemies, just two people who have history. I deserve a chance to explain. Please." No name at the bottom, just that line. I folded it back into the envelope and slid it into the junk drawer without a second thought. I didn't need his pain to feel peace. I didn't need his apology to move forward. That afternoon, I sat with my laptop open at the kitchen table. The baby napped in his bassinet nearby, a pacifier shifting gently with each breath. The cursor blinked against a blank document until I finally started typing. The day I was kicked out of the car and into myself. The title made me pause. I didn't rewrite it. I wrote for hours. I wrote about the silence, the shame, the slow unraveling. I wrote about the subtle digs at dinner tables, the nights I cleaned up messes I didn't make, the way my body carried life while my husband carried nothing but pride. I wrote the story I had buried under layers of justification for years, and when I was done, I hit submit. The next morning, it was published on a site for women's voices and survivor stories. By evening, I had over 300 comments. By the end of the week, thousands. "I see you. I was you. I left after 20 years. Thank you for saying what I never could." My daughter sent me this. I think she's trying to tell me something. I didn't reply to every message, but I read each one. Let them settle. Let them remind me that what happened to me wasn't a private shame. It was part of a pattern that needed to be seen. One Thursday, Delara dropped by unannounced. She brought a small bouquet of tulips and a pack of diapers. No briefcase this time. We sat on the porch while the baby slept inside. "I don't know how to thank you," I said finally, setting my tea aside. Delara shook her head. "Don't. No, really. You didn't just represent me. You stood beside me when I didn't even believe I was worth standing beside." She let the silence sit for a few moments before answering. "I didn't save you, Greta. I gave you the chance to save yourself. That's always the point." We didn't say much else, just watched the breeze stir the neighbors' wind chimes and listen to the rhythm of something new settling into our bones. That night, after I put the baby down, I logged into my blog. I hadn't updated it since the week after the court ruling. I typed, "I'm not fully healed. Some nights, I still wake up and expect to hear keys in the door that no longer opens. Some mornings, I look at the empty side of the bed and feel a strange relief, wrapped in something that still aches. But I'm healing. In small ways, in quiet choices, in the laughter of my child, in the meals I make without needing anyone to say thank you, in the silence I no longer fear. I don't carry scars anymore. I carry roots. Some scars don't show. but they shape everything we become. Greta's story isn't just about a broken marriage, it's about reclaiming your voice, even after years of silence. What would you do if your family tried to erase your pain? If this story moved you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-life revenge stories and powerful tales of resilience.